A German Shepherd was discovered on an abandoned property, so traumatized he wouldn't let anyone near him. For months, he huddled in the corner of his kennel while potential adopters passed him by. But what happened when one special visitor arrived at the shelter defied everything the staff thought possible. Get ready for a true story that will change how you see the incredible bond between humans and dogs. Riverside County Animal Shelter in California was operating beyond capacity in July 2021. The nationwide surge in pandemic pet surrenders had pushed the facility to its limits. For shelter director Linda Hayes, a 20-year veteran of animal welfare, the arrival of yet another rescue case seemed like just one more challenge in an overwhelming day. "We have absolutely no space," she explained to Animal Control Officer Daniel Cruz as he carried in a crate. "The euthanasia list already has 15 dogs this week." Daniel shook his head. "You'll want to make room for this one, Linda. Property foreclosure in Indio. Owner walked away months ago from the looks of it." Inside the crate was a severely emaciated German Shepherd, approximately 3 years old. He had survived by drinking from a leaking garden hose and scavenging whatever he could find in the overgrown yard where he'd been abandoned. His collar had embedded into his neck as he grew, requiring immediate surgical removal. Dr. Emily Tran, the shelter's lead veterinarian, documented the extensive list of medical issues: advanced malnutrition with a body score of 2 out of 9, severe dehydration requiring IV fluids, multiple untreated wounds, hookworms, ear infections, and pressure sores. "Physically, we can rehabilitate him," she told Linda after the initial treatment, "but I'm concerned about his psychological state. He's exhibiting extreme fear responses." Unlike many rescued dogs who seek human contact despite past abuse, this shepherd, temporarily named Shadow by the medical team, showed profound terror at human proximity. When approached in his kennel, he would press himself into the farthest corner, his body trembling violently. He would not make eye contact, would not approach the front of the kennel even for food, and responded to any attempt to leash him with frozen terror. "It's as if he's shut down completely," observed Samantha Lee, the shelter's behavioral specialist, after her third attempt to connect with him. For 2 weeks, the staff made little progress despite their best efforts. Shadow would eat only when the kennel was completely empty of human presence. Security cameras captured his movement only during the quietest overnight hours, when he would finally leave his corner to pace in tight, anxious circles. "We're running out of options," Linda acknowledged during a staff meeting in early August. "If we can't find a specialized rescue to take him by Friday, we may need to make a difficult decision." That Thursday afternoon, one day before the deadline, Samantha made one final attempt to reach Shadow. Rather than approaching the kennel directly, she simply sat on the floor in the corridor outside, her back against the opposite wall, reading aloud from a paperback novel. For nearly an hour, she pretended to ignore the German Shepherd while maintaining a calm presence. When she finally stood to leave, she noticed something that gave her pause. Shadow remained in his corner, but his eyes were now tracking her movement. For the briefest moment, their gazes met. It was the first eye contact he had initiated since his arrival. "I need 48 more hours," she told Linda, her voice urgent. "I think there's still someone in there." Reluctantly, Linda agreed to the extension. Neither of them could have anticipated that the following day would bring an unexpected visitor, someone who would change Shadow's story forever. Rachel Morgan hadn't planned to visit the shelter that Friday morning. At 34, her job as a physical therapist at Eisenhower Medical Center kept her busy, and her recent divorce had left her focused on rebuilding her life in a modest rental cottage in Palm Desert. A dog was definitely not on her agenda. "I'm just dropping off some old towels and blankets," she explained to the volunteer at the front desk. "My mom used to volunteer here years ago." Mike Russell, the weekend supervisor, overheard the conversation. "We appreciate the donation," he said warmly. "Would you like a quick tour? We've made a lot of upgrades since your mom's time." Rachel hesitated, then smiled. "Sure, I have a few minutes." The tour moved through the newly renovated adoption areas. Playful puppies pawed at kennel doors. Adult dogs wagged their tails, eager for attention. Rachel smiled at them all, offering soft words and warm eyes, but none sparked anything deeper than passing affection. "That's most of our adoption-ready pets," Mike said as they neared the end of the corridor. "The area beyond this point is mostly for medical cases and behaviorally challenged dogs who aren't quite ready for adoption yet." Rachel paused, curious. "Mind if we peek anyway? My mom always had a soft spot for the tough cases." Mike hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, but please stay back from the kennel doors. Some of these dogs are still working through fear and aggression issues." As they walked through the rehabilitation section, Mike explained each case. A dog recovering from surgery, another undergoing heartworm treatment, a pair of malnourished puppies starting to gain weight. Then they reached Shadow's kennel. "This is our most challenging case," Mike said quietly. "German Shepherd, about 3 years old, found abandoned. He's been here almost 3 weeks and still won't come out of that corner. We're hoping a rescue group might have the resources to help." Rachel stopped. Something about the huddled figure in the shadows caught her attention. Shadow was pressed against the wall, barely visible, his amber eyes watching them warily from the darkness. "What's his story?" she asked. "We don't know the full details," Mike said. "But based on his behavior, we suspect long-term abuse and isolation. He's never shown aggression, just extreme fear. Most concerning is his complete withdrawal. He won't engage with humans at all." Rachel stood silently for a moment. Then, without asking permission, she sat down cross-legged on the floor outside the kennel, her back against the opposite wall, coincidentally the exact same position Samantha Lee had taken the day before. "What are you doing?" Mike asked, surprised. "I'm not sure," Rachel replied. "Just giving him space while still being present. Do you mind if I sit here for a few minutes?" Mike checked his watch. "I need to help with medication rounds, but I'll come back in about 15 minutes. Rachel nodded. "That's perfect." She sat in silence, occasionally glancing at her phone, but mostly just existing. Dying. No movement, no demands, no pressure on the frightened dog. 10 minutes passed. Shadow remained in his corner, but his eyes never left Rachel. Then, almost imperceptibly, he shifted his weight. Not toward her, just a small softening of his posture. A slight release of tension. When Mike returned, he found Rachel still sitting quietly. "Any change?" he whispered. "Not really," she said softly. "But I'd like to come back tomorrow, if that's okay." Mike looked surprised. "Sure, but he'll probably be the same tomorrow. These cases take months." Rachel stood, brushing off her jeans. "I understand, I just feel like I should come back." As she gathered her purse, she glanced back one more time. Shadow had shifted again. This time he was watching her leave, with what looked like the faintest glimmer of curiosity. Rachel couldn't explain it. Not to Mike, not to herself. Perhaps it was the sorrow in his eyes. Or maybe it was something deeper. Something broken in both of them that recognized its reflection in the other. Whatever it was, she knew one thing as she walked out the door. She was coming back. Rachel Morgan returned to the shelter the next morning, arriving just as the doors opened. This time she came prepared. A folding camp chair, a well-worn book, and a small Bluetooth speaker. She had used this setup countless times before with her most anxious physical therapy patients, especially veterans dealing with PTSD. Today, it wasn't a patient she was trying to reach. It was a dog who had forgotten how to trust. "I wasn't sure you'd really come back," said Samantha Lee, the behavioral specialist, as Rachel stepped inside. "Honestly," Rachel replied, "neither was I, but I couldn't stop thinking about him last night." Samantha led her to Shadow's kennel. The German Shepherd was in his usual corner, but something was different. As soon as Rachel approached, his ears twitched. He recognized her. "That's interesting," Samantha noted quietly. "He's unusually alert to your arrival." Rachel set up her chair 6 feet away from the kennel door, at an angle, never directly facing him. She placed the small speaker nearby and played soft classical music, just loud enough to fill the background. Then she sat, opened her book, and began reading aloud in a calm, even tone. "Do you mind if I stay for a while?" she asked. "Not at all," Samantha replied. "I'll check in periodically. Just remember, no sudden movements, no extended eye contact, and absolutely don't enter the kennel without staff present." For the next 3 hours, Rachel simply existed beside Shadow. Sometimes she read aloud, other times she worked quietly on her laptop, catching up on patient notes. She never looked directly at him, but she was fully aware of his presence. Around noon, Samantha returned with a sandwich in hand. "Any changes?" she whispered. Rachel smiled faintly. "About an hour ago, he moved to the middle of the kennel. He's been watching me, but he goes back to his corner whenever someone else walks by." Samantha leaned in and peeked. Shadow was indeed lying closer to the front, curled but not pressed into the wall. That to her was a breakthrough. "That's remarkable progress," she said, trying to contain her professional excitement. After Samantha left, Rachel continued her quiet routine. She began to talk to Shadow softly, not about anything in particular. Just casual, soothing monologues. What she had for breakfast, the book she was reading, how peaceful the music was. She never asked anything of him. She just let him be. Then it happened. Shortly after 2 p.m., Rachel was reading silently when she noticed subtle movement out of the corner of her eye. She didn't turn, but she could sense it. He was approaching. She slowly shifted her vision toward the kennel, carefully avoiding sudden movement. Shadow had moved to the very front of his kennel. He stood there, just a few feet away, eyes locked onto Rachel with an intensity that didn't feel like fear. It felt like longing, recognition, hope. Rachel didn't move her chair, didn't raise her voice. She simply began reading aloud again, her tone soft and rhythmic. A few feet away, Shadow stayed. When Linda Hayes, the shelter director, arrived to check on things, she froze at the sight. "I've never seen him this far from his corner," she whispered to Samantha, who had joined her. "What did she do?" "Nothing," Samantha replied, eyes still on Rachel. "That's what's so remarkable. She just existed near him, patiently, without demands." Before Rachel left that evening, she asked if she could return the next day. Linda didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. I'm adjusting his status in our system right now. No decisions will be made about his future. Not until we see where this goes." As Rachel packed her things, Shadow slowly returned to his corner. But the movement wasn't frantic. It was measured. He glanced back at her as she turned toward the door. "See you tomorrow," she whispered. What no one realized yet, not Rachel, not Samantha, not Linda, was that Shadow's response to her wasn't random. There was something specific about her, something familiar, that had quietly breached his defenses. And very soon they would all learn why. Over the next 2 weeks, Rachel returned to the shelter every day, rearranging her work schedule to spend at least 2 hours with Shadow. Each visit brought subtle but meaningful progress. By the end of the first week, Shadow would approach the front of the kennel as soon as he saw her. If anyone else appeared, however, he'd retreat to his corner, still gripped by the instincts of a dog who had lived too long in fear. "I've never seen bonding happen this quickly with a traumatized dog," Samantha said while reviewing the security footage with Linda Hayes, "especially one who started off this shutdown." Rachel couldn't explain it either. "It feels like we've met before," she admitted quietly, "like he somehow recognizes me, though I know that's impossible." By day 10, Shadow was taking treats from her hand through the kennel bars. The moment brought tears to Linda's eyes. "We need to start thinking about next steps," she told Rachel gently. "Would you consider fostering him?" Rachel hesitated. "My current rental doesn't allow pets, but I've been looking for a new place anyway. If I can find one that's dog-friendly, I'd absolutely consider it." That afternoon, while sitting beside Shadow's kennel, Rachel received an unexpected phone call from a colleague at the hospital, Dr. Nathan Wells, a neurologist she respected deeply. "I have a special case," he said, "a veteran with a traumatic brain injury and PTSD. He's refusing to come to the hospital, but the VA has approved home-based therapy. Would you be willing to do in-home visits 3 times a week?" Rachel agreed, scheduling the first appointment for the following morning. "Make it early," she said. "I'd still like to visit the shelter afterward." The next day, Rachel arrived at a modest ranch-style home in La Quinta. A VA social worker met her outside. "Just so you're prepared," the woman said softly, "Captain Ben Walker has been through extensive trauma. IED explosion in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Physically, he's recovered well, but the PTSD and cognitive issues, those have been harder. He barely speaks to anyone." Rachel nodded, her heart already tightening with empathy. She had worked with men like him before. Inside, a man in his mid-30s sat in a wheelchair by the window. Tall, broad-shouldered, muscular, but his posture was rigid, his gaze distant. He barely glanced at Rachel when she entered. "Captain Walker, this is Rachel Morgan, the physical therapist Dr. Wells recommended," the social worker said gently. Rachel approached slowly, her body language calm, her tone low and respectful. "Good morning, Captain. It's nice to meet you." For a moment, he just stared. Then something flickered in his expression. "Have we met before?" he asked, voice rough from disuse. "I don't think so," Rachel said with a small smile. "I moved here recently." The session continued. Rachel performed an initial mobility assessment, explained her therapy plan, and gently introduced him to light movement exercises. Captain Walker didn't say much, but he followed directions, cooperative, even if emotionally distant. As they finished, the social worker pulled Rachel aside in the hallway. "That was more engagement than I've seen from him in 6 months," she whispered. "He hasn't even let other providers finish their assessments." Later that afternoon, Rachel sat outside Shadow's kennel again. She was still wearing the same clothes she'd worn to the appointment. And oddly, Shadow was especially interested in sniffing her, more than usual. He pressed his nose against the bars, particularly drawn to her shoes and the hem of her pants. Has Shadow had any history with military personnel? Rachel asked Samantha curiously. Samantha raised an eyebrow. We don't know anything about his background. Why? Just a feeling, Rachel murmured. Shadow was still sniffing the leg of her jeans like it was something important, something known. 2 days later, during her second home visit, Rachel arrived at Captain Walker's house to the sound of frantic barking inside. Not defensive barking, this was panicked, desperate. The VA social worker met her outside, looking shaken. Rough night, she said. Nightmares again. He mentioned a dog this time, said he used to work with a military canine in Afghanistan. The episode seems tied to losing that dog in the explosion. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Did he say what kind of dog? A German shepherd. Name was Shadow. Her heart was pounding now. Could it be? During the session, Rachel couldn't concentrate. Her mind raced with the pieces falling into place. When they were finished, she sat down across from Captain Walker. Your dog in Afghanistan, she began slowly. What happened to him? Captain Ben Walker's face tightened. Shadow was a search and detection dog. He wasn't officially mine. He belonged to the military. But we worked together every day for 2 years. He saved my life more than once. After the IED went off, I was evacuated immediately. They said Shadow ran off, disoriented, never found. He looked away. I begged to stay and help search, but my injuries were too severe. What did he look like? Rachel asked, her voice almost trembling. Black and tan, big scar on his right shoulder from an old mission. Rachel slowly pulled out her phone and opened her photo gallery. She handed it to him. Does this look familiar? Ben took the phone, and the moment his eyes fell on the image, something shifted. His shoulders tensed, breath caught. He stared for a long time. It looks like him, he said finally. I can't say for sure, but the eyes and that scar. There's one way to find out, Rachel whispered. Would you be willing to come to the shelter? An hour later, all the arrangements were in place. Linda Hayes had agreed to allow a private after-hours visit. The VA social worker helped Captain Ben Walker into Rachel's car, his wheelchair folded and secured in the trunk. Rachel drove in silence, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, heart thudding with a mixture of hope and doubt. When they arrived, Samantha Lee met them at the side entrance of the shelter. I've moved Shadow to the meet and greet room, she explained softly. It's quieter in there, but please understand, if he shows signs of distress, we'll need to end the session immediately. Ben nodded. He looked calm on the surface, but Rachel could see it, the tightness in his jaw, the subtle tremor in his hands. She rolled his wheelchair down the corridor, stopping just outside the closed door. Ready? She asked, voice gentle. Ben took a deep breath and nodded. Samantha opened the door. Inside, Shadow stood at the far end of the room, wary and motionless. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock and the hum of the ceiling light. Shadow's eyes flicked toward the doorway, then away again. He didn't recognize them yet. Then Ben spoke. One word, a command. His voice was stronger than Rachel had ever heard it. Clear, firm, unmistakably military. Attention! Shadow's head snapped up. His entire body froze, ears fully erect, nostrils flaring. Ben didn't speak again. He didn't need to. For a long second, Shadow stared, rigid and trembling. Then his nose began working furiously. He stepped forward, then another step. Then, Shadow, come, Ben said, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion. What happened next left everyone breathless. The dog, who had spent weeks hiding in corners, terrified of human touch, suddenly surged forward, legs pounding against the tile floor, tail flying, body quivering with something no one had seen in him before. Joy, recognition, love. He barreled across the room and practically launched himself into Ben's lap, ignoring the wheelchair, the space, the silence. Shadow whined, whimpered, licked Ben's face, and pressed his massive head into the man's chest like he was trying to melt into him. Ben wrapped his arms around the dog and didn't let go. His shoulders shook, silent sobs racking his body as he buried his face in Shadow's fur. Rachel turned away, eyes brimming. Samantha covered her mouth with one hand. I think that answers the question, Samantha whispered through her tears. Later, after the room had quieted and Shadow lay calmly at Ben's side, his head resting on the soldier's foot, the pieces began to come together. Through Rachel's help, the VA and the Military Working Dog Program, they traced what little they could. Shadow had indeed survived the explosion in Afghanistan. He had been found injured, transported back to the U.S., and rehabilitated at Lackland Air Force Base. Declared unfit for further service due to trauma, he was placed through a private adoption organization. Somewhere in that process, his trail went cold. No one knew who had adopted him, why he was abandoned, or how he ended up starving behind an empty house in India. What mattered now wasn't the missing years. It was that he had found his person again, and that his person had never stopped missing him. The shelter was quiet when they left that night, Shadow walking beside Ben's wheelchair, his gait cautious but sure, as if reacquainting himself with the rhythm of companionship. At the curb, Shadow hesitated before jumping into Rachel's car, glancing back at the shelter one last time. But when Ben whispered, "It's okay, boy. You're coming home," Shadow climbed in, curled at Ben's feet, and didn't move for the entire ride. Ben's home, once sterile and silent, changed overnight. Shadow paced the halls, sniffing corners, reacquainting himself with the scent of safety. He slept by Ben's bed, curled tightly like he'd done during deployments. And Ben? He began sleeping through the night for the first time in years. "It's like he never left," Ben whispered to Rachel one morning. "He's picking up right where we left off." But healing wasn't instant. Shadow still flinched at sudden noises. Ben still had days when the silence felt too loud. But now they faced the darkness together. And somehow, that made all the difference. Thank you for watching this unforgettable story of healing and reunion. If Shadow and Ben's journey moved you, let us know in the comments. What part touched your heart the most? Don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story that matters. Sometimes the right connection can change everything. See you next time.